January 21st, 1922. I reached the farm just a few hours ago, and it is more than I could have possibly imagined. I knew as soon as I arrived that I had made the right choice. I was so uncertain about leaving the Thompsons' home. I had been there for so long. But the allure of a better pay here at the Richards farmstead was too much to resist. The Richards have been very kind in our relations, and I expect that to continue, which pleases me greatly. They've been very respectful and forthcoming with me about what I should expect working as a maid on their farm. That's not to say the Thompsons family lacked any manner of generosity, but there were times where I often felt invisible. Mr. Richards and his wife treated me almost as if I was family the moment we met. "You're going to be living in our home and tending to our children," John Richards told me. Marjorie said, "It's only right we treat you as one of us." Though the pay increase is much appreciated, I must admit, it was that sort of kinship Mr. and Mrs. Richards expressed that really brought me to their home. It is absolutely beautiful here, even in the winter months. I was rather amused when the driver turned onto an almost invisible dirt path off the main road. I hadn't even noticed it was there. It took me by surprise to see just how long the path was, as it seemed to stretch for miles. But it was relaxing to see nothing but a canopy of leafless tree branches overhead, as dark as that may sound. Despite the cold emptiness of the frozen woods, I found myself feeling tranquil at the sight of such a peculiar beauty. Before I knew it, the surrounding woods had suddenly opened its embrace. The path cleared into a large open field, in which the Richards farmstead was visible in the distance. I was memorized instantly. The field was covered in a light white frost, which glimmered in the morning sun. I could see several farmheads tending to their duties. The woods that tightly surrounded the vehicle as the driver brought us down the road now spread out and wrapped around the entire farm, creating some sort of barricade that hides it from the rest of the world. It is truly amazing how it appears now in the winter. I cannot imagine how it must look in the warm months of summer. I would not say this is paradise by any means, but it is certainly a place that felt like home, and that is all I could have hoped for. Mr. Richards had given me the day to get familiar with their home and its residents. Later on, I should be acquainted with my duties, and then I will meet the children. Tomorrow will be my first real day, and I am truly excited. January 22nd, 1922. Today was my first day performing my duties around the Richards farmstead. Since I'm not one of the farmhands, my work kept me within the confines of their home. Not that I'm complaining. I am no farmer by any means, nor would I want to be. Yesterday, Mr. Richards took me on a tour of his farmstead and introduced me to all his employees. They were all very kind and appear to be hard workers. I admire and appreciate their resolve and dedication. Aside from that, I got to meet some of the more wild inhabitants. I've never had the opportunity to be up and close and personal with the animals such as these. The pigs and cows were rather bland, but the horses always appear so majestic. Mrs. Richards also took the time to introduce me to her children. Timothy is 7, and Charlotte is only 3. They are both so adorable, with their matching blonde hair and cute little smiles. Timothy was surprisingly caring of his baby sister. It was very sweet to watch him play along with her. Though I don't believe I'll personally be spending much time with the children unless Mrs. Richards asks of me, I will be happy to see their young faces each day. I love children, and these two seem to be the sweetest. Mostly I'll be tidying up the household. It is rather large, but that keeps it all the more interesting. I never minded cleaning, especially not a home such as this. Mrs. Richards keeps such a lovely home. I'd have half a mind to ask her why she decided to hire me in the first place. When I was just getting into contact with the Richards, I was told the old maid had to leave to take care of an old relative, but that was months ago. Clearly Mrs. Richards had been able to do just as well of a job as anyone that could be paid to do it. Still, I won't be the one to judge. I'm thankful to have this employment. She's obviously worked hard to keep the house as nice as it is, and I'm gladly to be the one to make sure it stays that way. It is getting late, and I'm not quite used to this schedule just yet. It has started to snow, so I think I'll enjoy the view of the farm from the window before I get to bed. January 23rd, 1922. Something strange happened today. While I was dusting the windows, I noticed a commotion going on outside involving Mr. Richards and one of the farmhands. Gregor, I think his name is. They seemed to be in a rather heated argument. I believed I would do well to mind my own business, but when I saw the children watching from another window, I decided it might be best to interrupt before they were subjected to any more undesirable behavior. I opened the door and walked over to them. They hadn't noticed me until upon asking if everything was all right. Mr. Richards seemed surprised to see me, but Gregor had engaged me immediately. He told me that I'd be crazy to stay here, and that I should leave the farm like the last maid. When Gregor mentioned this, Mr. Richards seemed rather annoyed. I didn't understand, so when I inquired about it, Mr. Richard was quick to try and shut down the subject. But Gregor caught on before he could do so and explained it to me. Apparently, the maid before me did not leave because of an ill relative, like I was originally told, but rather because she feared the farm was haunted. I didn't know how to respond to this information, but before I could say anything, Gregor grabbed my arm and brought me over to a certain area in the snow. Mr. Richards protested, but did not physically intervene. Then Gregor pointed to the snow and told me to look. What he showed me was indeed eerie. Footsteps that came all the way from the edge of the woods into the farm. Gregor looked at me petrified, but I didn't completely understand his fear. He saw the puzzlement in my face and immediately, almost as if it should have been obvious, he explained his fears. There are none leading back, he tells me. I have looked and there are none. I didn't know what to make of such information, but I didn't have the chance to discuss it with him either. He left the farm immediately after, and I didn't expect he'll return. Mr. Richards, however, was honest with me. He explained why he had lied about the last maid. He didn't want to put off possible replacements because of her own paranoia. That was something I understood, as I doubt many women would be happy to work here if they were under the impression that it was haunted. I'm not sure I would even have taken the job myself had I known that, but I can't say I'm a strong believer in such nonsense. A moment ago, I believe I heard footsteps in the attic. They were very brief and light, but they were noticeable. I can see now that I'm letting my own paranoia and imagination get the better of me. I think it's time for bed. January 15th, 1922. A couple days have passed since I last wrote. Not much have occurred since then. Yesterday, Mr. and Mrs. Richards both sat me down and apologized to me personally for not being honest about their previous maid. I assured them that I took no offense, and that I understood their reasoning, but they still seemed rather ashamed of it. I think they were also ashamed of the notion that they had a haunted home, but I told them that the idea was silly. I truthfully felt bad for them. I knew they were very caring people, and I made sure that they knew that. Still, I could not help but feel that they were feeling guilty about having misled me, so I tried to cheer them up with a few good laughs. It lightened the mood a bit, but they appeared apprehensive of my understanding and lightheartedness. Gregor, as I expected, did not return to the farm, but it did not seem to affect the efficiency of the running farm of Mr. Richards. The animals still got fed, the pens still got cleaned, the eggs still collected. It's obvious that the farmstead can survive a spooked worker or two. As for the footprints in the snow, they had since faded with wind and more snow. No other farmhand seemed to care. They either didn't notice or thought the money was far too important than being worried about ghastly entities. Even so, Mr. Richards had some of his men scour the area as a precaution to make sure no one was lurking around the farm. He has mentioned to me that he has had trouble with stolen livestock in the past, but all such matters have been resolved quite quickly, despite being very closed off from the rest of the world. The people in this area are actually part of a very tight-knit community. It's not hard to determine if that animal intentionally belonged to someone else close by. However, the men never found any intruders, nor did they find any missing livestock. It would appear that everything was normal, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. Unless, of course, there is a ghost. Whatever the case, A few strange occurrences here and there probably wouldn't hurt anyone. January 26th, 1922. Today was a very cold day. The snow continues to pile on little by little. I've noticed that some here are not as fond of it as I am, but I suppose they knew what they were getting themselves into. Personally, I love waking up and going right to my window. I don't mind sitting in the frigid draft it lets in when I'm able to see snowflakes falling from what seems like miles. It is truly beautiful. When I exited my room this morning, I found a newspaper in front of my door. It was a brand I did not recognize, from an area I did not know. Not only that, but it was also several days old. Regardless, I don't know where it came from or who it belonged to, but it was not mine. I do not read newspapers. I decided to go see Mr. Richards about it to see if maybe someone had left it there by accident. When I asked him about it, he told me he thought it could be mine because it was a paper he didn't recognize from anyone else on the farm. Seeing as I was the newest inhabitant of the farm, he left it at my doorstep thinking it belonged to me. I explained to him that it wasn't mine, and that I don't even read newspapers, and that I wasn't sure who it belonged to. He had a curious expression on his face that told me he was unsure of where the paper could have come from, if not from me, but I don't think either of us cared enough to take the subject any further, so I took the paper and threw it in the trash. Later on, when I was busy doing laundry, Mrs. Richards came asking me if I knew where the house keys might be. I told her that the last time I saw them, they were hanging on the hook where they're always supposed to be, but I had to admit that I wasn't exactly sure of the last time I'd actually seen them, as it's nothing I never thought to take notice of. She was not angry, but there was an obvious worry on her face. I believe she may be under the impression that one of the farmhands had taken them. She never did seem to trust them. Before I came to my room this evening, I asked her if she'd ever found them. She said she hadn't, but was certain she had just misplaced them. They'll turn up eventually, she told me. She's probably right. We all misplace things in the most obvious places. The creaking steps are back. I really should ask Mr. Richards about that. I'm starting to think one of the children tends to wander at night, though I haven't had a clue why they would venture into the attic. January 27th, 1922. I am so happy. I am so happy. This place is wonderful. I hope to stay here forever. I want to live here forever. I want to die here forever. I think I will. It is so beautiful. Good night. From the Maid. January 28, 1922. Report of Officer Charles Dawson. Is this on? Okay. When I and the other officers had first arrived at the scene of the crime, I had not believed anything had appeared amiss, but the farmhands who had alerted us were terrified. When I asked them where Mr. Rogers was, he told me to go into the barn. At first, I did not understand. I slowly proceeded to the barn and noticed something peculiar about the farm. And that peculiarity was that everything was normal. The animals were well fed and taken care of. And there was smoke spewing from the home of the Richards family, where I assumed they must be. What was off, however, is why all of this appeared so normal. The farm looked like it had been kept in checks as it usually is. Yet here the farmhands scared out of their wits. It is for that reason instinct told me to draw my firearm as I approached the barn. The other officers did the same as they saw my gesture. It would turn out that my weapon would prove to be unnecessary, or more appropriately, it would prove to be too late. As I opened the barn door, I was greeted by a ghastly smell that I had never smelled before in this small town. Initially, I could not pinpoint the origin of the stench, but once we moved deeper into the barn, we discovered the source. A grisly sense of death that I had never been unfortunate enough to witness in my career until now. One of the officers under me vomited immediately. Another walked out of the barn almost as soon as he walked in, crying. Others simply turned in disgust. But I stood there staring at the bodies. We saw blood and dread and death, and a confusing set of yet unseen events that somehow led to it. There were 2 bodies in the barn. I knew them personally. John Richards, the owner of this farm, was a good man and undeserving of his fate. May God rest his soul. I found him in a pile of hay laying face down with a hole-like wound in the back of his head. I found Marjorie a few feet away, lying in the dirt, with a similar wound. Judging by how we found them with the wounds in the back of their heads, lying face first on the ground, I would assume that their murderer, or murderers, had forced them into the barn, where they were then executed whilst on their knees. To see John and Marjorie like this, words cannot describe. But then I remembered the 2 had children, and an unyielding fear came over me. It was at this point I pulled 2 of the better composed men aside and instructed them to stay at my rear and be on their guard. Together we walked forward the family's home, and I remember an insatiable wrath in me, as I knew what I was going to find. We entered through the front door, I with my weapon hanging steadily in the air. I don't know if I actually believed the perpetrator would still be present, but I know that I wanted that to be so. I moved past the stairway and down the hall into the kitchen. There had been some crumbs left behind on the plate. I cannot say for certain if the suspect had stayed for a time after the crime, or if he had interrupted the family in the middle of a meal. It should be noted, however, that there was just 1 plate. I had turned around from there and proceeded to check the rest of the rooms of the first floor, but found nothing out of place. There had been no sign, as far as I could tell, that anything that had been taken from the home. In fact, there was some bit of money on a table that remained untouched. It would seem that this was not a robbery, but rather a result of a monstrous activity with no real explanation. When I found myself back at the stairs, I and the other officers continued upward, to find what I feared yet expected all along. Despite that, I was always at the ready to pull the trigger on my firearm. At the top of the stairs we came upon an elongated hallway, with rooms located on each side, and another set of stairs to the 3rd floor at the end. I knew that the children's room was at the end of the hall, on the left-hand side by those stairs. I could see the door from where I stood, which remained closed. Every other door was open. There was the master bedroom, which appeared to have been unused, and then there was the 2 guest bedrooms, one of which had looked as if it was recently used. This angered me, but I did not believe the other officers understood the sick and twisted sense of humor from the perpetrator that I saw in it. After determining that the first few rooms were safe, we moved forward towards the children's room. When I reached the door, I stood there for a moment, considering whether or not it was wise to look inside. Unfortunately, as an officer of the law, I do not truly have the luxury of that choice. But as a commanding officer at this crime scene, I could save my fellow officers from having to bear witness to what I was going to see. I had them turn back and go down the stairs, and once they had all vacated the area, I continued. I put my hand on the doorknob, twisted it, and entered. I was in the room for 5 minutes, and I only got as far as 2 steps before I could not bring myself to move anymore. I cannot and will not record in this report what I saw, nor will I ever speak of it to anyone ever. It was a sight that as few people as possible should see, let alone hear of, and it will haunt me for the rest of my days. When I was able to regain my composure, I backed out of the room and shut the door. I made sure the other officers were still out of sight. If I became lucky enough to find the scum of this god-beautiful earth, then I wanted to be the one to send him back to hell where he came from. But I would not get the chance. I proceeded up to the 3rd floor, where there were only 2 more rooms and a ceiling door to the attic. The room on the right appeared to be used for storage, and the room on the left contained another gruesome sight that I admittedly did not expect to see. It was a maid's room, and she was still present. She laid with her head down at her desk, but facing the doorway. I assumed that she was left like this intentionally. Her throat was cut, and she was covered in her own drying blood. She had a horrific look on her face, as if she was staring past me, and at me at the same moment. Her mouth hung open, contorted in such a strange way, like she had been murdered in the middle of her screams. Her left arm was hanging off her desk, but her right was still posted on top of it. I approached the victim and saw that the right hand was placed on top of a book. Looking closer, I saw that this book was actually a diary. I reluctantly moved the hand to pick up the diary and found something underneath. A blood-written number 34. I knew what it meant right away, so I turned the page. The following is what was written on the page in the maid's blood. To whoever this may concern, I hope you like my work. I made sure I got every last one of them. I got them at night. First the parents who had led to the barn. They begged. They always beg. Next the kids, who thought they could hide from me, but I was smarter. Then there was the maid. She was fun. Asleep when I found her. Before I finished with her, I took her on a tour around the farm to show her my work. Then I brought her back here and made her write her last entry. I thought that would be funny. Then she got boring, so I shut her up forever. She was loud anyway. Could barely get her to stop talking even after I cut her. They never saw me coming. I was here for a long time before anyone noticed. And when they noticed, it was too late. I came in from the woods and stayed under the wooden floor of the barn. They searched the whole farm and never checked there. I think that's funny. I stayed here for a while after I did my work. I like farms. Reminds me of home and family. I love animals too, so I took care of them. I slept in one of the rooms below. Not bad, but I've had better. And not to mention that fucking noise. At first I thought I had another play toy hiding up in the attic. But after searching, I found nobody. There wasn't a damn thing except for a set of keys. So I left. It scared me, to be honest with you. I'm a God-fearing man, and I know well enough that the sound of footsteps made by nobody is downright unholy. Damn near burnt the place down after that, but I realized that would have taken the glory of my work. So here it is. Enjoy it. Don't look for me, for I'm long gone. And a word of advice, friend. Don't go into that attic. There's something up there even I couldn't get to. Regards, TF.